Thank you all for coming along. So my name is Giles Alexander. I've been with Thoughtworks for about 3 years now. I've worked in a number of different offices. Started in Australia, hence the accent, and since then I've worked in the US and India, and I've been here in London for about 7 months or so. Come join Thoughtworks and you'll get to see the world. It's quite an experience. We actually have a couple of recruiters down the back there, coincidentally enough. So in the last year and a half or so, I've been focusing in mobile projects, looking at technology and strategy and how we generally work with mobile. And at heart, I am a developer, so my focus is technical, but looking more broadly at how that technology can really help you deliver on mobile in this world that we're now entering, because mobile really has changed things quite substantially. We refer to this now as the shattered future. It's a term that was coined by a colleague of ours in our San Francisco office, Johnny Leroy. What it's really talking about is this idea that we're used to working with a laptop. We're sitting down at a computer in this single screen view. And now that mobile has arrived, those single screens have shattered, and the fragments from that shattering have embedded themselves in our lives, in our pockets, on our couches, and all over the place. And this has changed more than just the size of the device you use. It's changed a lot of the things around how customers view your products. Except that, in many respects, it's never really changed in the customer's mind, because the customer's always seen a product. And that's what the customer's always wanted. What's really happened now is, because of these multiple channels through these different screens and these different fragments, it's really changed how you need to view your products and your applications. In the world of the web, that single screen, we had this idea that you could build a client for your product, and it was the client that your customers used. So you had your main systems and your client interacting with that, and that was how they would buy things and work with you. When mobile came along, we saw this transition to apps. Everyone wanted an app. You had to have an app. It just became the thing you needed to do and needed to have. And that's changing too now, because those apps are just one channel, and what your customers are really wanting to do is move between different channels to get at your product, whatever that might be, whatever that experience is, whatever they want to achieve and do with you. They're doing it. An app is just a way to achieve that and just a way to get through there. So you can now, we've gone from having to think about apps, not clients, and we're now not thinking about apps anymore. We need to be thinking about products. And what's important in this world is that you need to be aligning that view of your systems with that view that your customers have. So instead of thinking about what apps you need to build that consume your systems, you need to be thinking about ways that people can get at your products. And that works nicely for that three view that we have: the laptop, the tablet, and the smartphone. That's only the beginning. We think there are going to be a number of other ways that this shattered future is going to manifest, other different ways people are going to see and want to interact with your products. And you can start to see that already with Siri and Google Glass. These are already there and are starting to open up. Once Google Glass is on the market, we're already talking about writing apps for that and how that's going to work. Apple at some point is going to open up what's happening with Siri to external applications, and if they don't, people are going to ignore Apple and embed voice recognition into their apps themselves. It's going to happen. So you need to be thinking about how your product is surfaced through these channels as well. So it's not enough just to think that, okay, cool, I've as well as understanding laptop, I can now understand tablet and smartphone, I'm done. That's the same thinking that left us all struggling to deal with that future when it first shattered, because it's going to continue to fragment. We're going to continue to see more things. For example, we think the W3C accessibility is an interesting taster of something. How many people here have iPhones? Yeah, lots. Well, more than I expected, actually. How many of you have you tried to use it with the accessibility mode on? It's really quite interesting, right? You can, as a well-sighted person, I can turn on the voiceover feature on my iPhone and close my eyes and send someone a text message. It takes time, but I can do it. So stepping back and looking at that, you've got to say that that's a pretty good accessible interface. It's really hard to imagine being able to do that with laptops and things like that. Where someone who is not experienced in operating in this mode can get by and achieve something. But it's also a really kind of deeply weird experience when I tried it, because essentially I'm standing there with my eyes closed to simulate some things, holding a blank, featureless piece of glass, stroking it. And it's talking to me and it's telling me what I'm doing. And that's not an accessible interface, that's a hack. That's a way of layering something that someone can work with onto something that was just never designed for that. It's all about visibility. And this is more than just accessibility, because someone driving a car is also someone who needs an accessible interface. The Google bot is something that needs an accessible interface. So how do they fit into this world? How do they make the most of it? Where can they achieve something out of this? And that's where accessibility in the shattered future really helps. That once you've positioned yourself and you've understood your products as requiring multiple channels, then adding a channel that supports someone driving a car is a smaller step from going from a laptop to an app, as long as you've positioned yourself correctly. And then there's this device here that has sold very, very well for a hobby, according to Apple. At this point, it's entirely locked down in typical Apple fashion. But there's potentially something interesting here, because these are in a lot of people's rooms, a lot of people's living rooms, connected to a TV, which a lot of people have. I think what we're waiting to see here is a better engagement model. People have been trying to launch web TV or interactive TV products for 20-odd years now, and they've never taken off. They've never been successful, because ultimately, sitting there and staring at something that's sort of 15 feet away, 15 feet? Something like that. Feet never really made it to Australia. It's all metric down there. It's not a great model for, say, surfing the web or doing anything like that. You're trying to pick your way through something. So once some reasonable kind of model for how to perform an interesting task with this quite nice large screen that everyone's got comes along, then we're going to see something there. And then it's going to be the same deal again. Suddenly everyone's going to be saying, how do I make my TV first web app? Things along those lines. But there's another question about this. How much of these products that are already out here are just segue for your face? It's pretty certain that Siri is, that you get your iPhone, you try it a little bit, it's a bit of fun, works a little bit, surprisingly well for people who don't have American accents, which is new in the world of voice recognition. But there are better ways to set your alarm. And so the real question, and where this really came from, is Google Glass the same? Looks a little bit weird. Let's see how we go on that one. And that's an interesting view of where we think the future is shattering and where we think these fragments are going to really emerge. Ultimately, it's about getting your products into people's hands, people who want to use and interact and touch your products. So what does that mean for you? So I want to spend some time talking about some clients that we've worked with who have adapted, I think, quite well. And another example of a company that you're probably all familiar with, who are a bit of an interesting case. Firstly, there's realestate.com.au. I expect not many people in this room will be familiar with them, but let me assure you they are Australia's largest property listing website. And property is a pretty big deal in Australia. They started out as partnering largely with print media. They've got a good relationship with a major newspaper chain in Australia, and that was their primary way of providing their listings. And of course, property listing companies were a pretty quick company to adopt the web, because it is a great medium. It's a far better medium, in fact, than what they're used to. So they've all gone online and they've all used it. And then mobile came along, and they thought, great, we need a mobile app. So they built themselves a native mobile app. But in the process of building that, they realized something about what they were actually doing and what they actually had. What they had wasn't a website. It was a high-quality database of property listings. That was their asset. That's what people were interested in. It wasn't this website that you could go and search and move around in. That was just a way of looking at it. So given that, and given that they've now adopted this new channel to that, the mobile handset, through this quite nice native app, what other channels have they got? What else could happen here? And they spotted an interesting way that the future shattered. Why are they only listing properties on websites and apps that they control? So they built a collection of widgets. small chunks of HTML, and JavaScript, and CSS that anyone could come along, grab, insert on their blog, their website, their whatever, and with a little bit of configuration that was intended to be there, they could show the properties that they wanted to show. Properties in the neighborhood that they were interested in blogging about, hyperlocal blogging and the like. And so suddenly, they've realized that the future shattered everywhere. And why couldn't any part of the web be a channel to their product? They didn't really need you on their website. They needed you looking at their listings, because that was how they could increase the value of that asset and that product that ultimately they were selling to the people who are providing the listings. At the moment, we're working with a major UK lifestyle publisher. I expect many of you have heard of them. They're still in the process of getting their app out and launched, so we have to refer to them as a major UK lifestyle publisher. These things happen. But they have spotted something similar, that their asset is their editorial content, their articles, their reviews, their commentary on what you can do to entertain yourself. Again, it's not a magazine or a website or a newspaper, it's that content. So what they're looking at building are better ways of getting you into that. And they're rearranging their systems and their organisation around this view. And they are expecting to see some long-term strategic value from that. But it's spotting the opportunity and spotting where the future is shattering and where it's going. And there's also Instagram. Is anyone here not familiar with Instagram? Okay. They are a app for smartphones, Android and iOS, that lets you take photos, apply some simple filtering that is intended to overcome the inherent limitations of the cameras and a small phone that fits in your pocket, and then share that with your friends. And it's sort of encouraging in the moment photo taking, sharing, and finding other people who produce photos that you like the look of. So they launched as a startup 4 years ago now, and they were quite successful. But they only launched with an iPhone app. We're quite famous for it. They had a really nice, high-touch, highly interactive iPhone application, and no Android app. And but iPhone users liked what they saw, installed it, used it, built their social networks, shared photos, interacted with people, got something going on. And all the time, and this is building, and people are like, hey, this is great. Where's the Android app? Where's the Android app? And then, after iPhone users noticed that they hadn't released any updates for a while. This goes on for a few months, about 6 months or so, something like that, and then an Android app is released. And it was interesting because the Android app was essentially identical to the iPhone app. In fact, reviews at the time went through it and looked at screen by screen, feature by feature. You really could not distinguish the two. And everyone hailed them. Brilliant, great decision. You've broadened your market base, more than doubled it. But what about an alternative thing they could have done? Because their product, the thing they actually had, wasn't that app. What their product was that social network that people were building, that connection between people, the people who are finding friends and finding someone interesting and following them and keeping up with other people's photos. It was that interconnectedness that's actually of value. But exploring a social network and exploring people's photos is not a great thing to do on a device this size. This is something you drop in at for a moment, check things out, and move on. You don't spend time surfing and looking at what's going on and broadening your social network. The great device for that is actually a laptop, or maybe a tablet. So, sorry, I think I might have done something to the sound. Put that over there. Okay. So what if they... We good? What if they had instead built a desktop web application that was focused on exploring that social network, where you could sit back and you could relax and you could find similar photos and tag photos and just browse, find people to follow more friends, build that, enhance that network. Once you've got a laptop website, that's pretty easy to make a tablet-friendly website. So at that point, you've now got an extra feature, social network browsing, and you've got two new platforms, laptops and tablets. If that tablet you'd chosen was the iPad, which would have made sense for Instagram, then you've also got a pile of code that lets you take photos and share them. You can take a tablet website, wrap it up into a native app, add that code, and you've now got a tablet application that lets you browse the social network and take and share photos. And you've got that on a different device, a device with a much bigger screen, where suddenly you can start to think about, let's improve the filtering we can do. Let's make it a bit richer, a bit more interesting. And maybe that's a premium feature that you sell, actually. So you've explored not just multiple devices and new features, you've also explored a new business model and a new way of making money. That's the shattered future thinking that we want to see, that we really want to explore with products in the new mobile world. It's not just about platforms, and it's not just about feature parity. It's about looking to exploit what is really powerful and useful on a given fragment, on one of these new channels. What can you really do with it that's different, new, and interesting? And that's kind of where we're at, but trying to give you a bit of a view, a bit of an idea of where things are going. So what do we think is next? What's an interesting thing that we think can really expand on this? And that's the sort of thing that's going to drive maybe new products and new ideas in the future. The first one is payments. It's an interesting problem. There's a lot of interest in this. A lot of people want to do something about payments, because a lot of people want to do something about patents as well. But because the current experience is pretty horrible. In the UK, with your contactless card payments, it's pretty smooth, but it doesn't translate well to online. In the US, it's really pretty awful. They're a long way behind in their banking technology. And the two major players in the world of mobile, Google and Apple, are both US companies, both based in Silicon Valley. When I was working in San Francisco a couple of years ago, I remember going into Bloomingdale's downtown. It's off Union Square. It's right in the heart of San Francisco. This is right in the heart of mobile technology. And I noticed at one of the checkouts, they had this little Google Wallet reader. And Google Wallet is Google's attempt to take on payments. It's a combined world that lets you put money on it, and just with contactless touch of your phone using near-field communication technology, NFC, you can make a payment. That's the dream. And that seems brilliant, right? You've got a small amount of money on a device you carry with you all the time, single touch, authorise low-value payments. So, I'm buying something at the counter. I ask the checkout assistant, what is that? She said, yeah, it's this payments thing. You can touch your phone and make a payment. I was like, right, okay. How often do people use that? And she said, every 2 weeks or so, someone says, what's that? Every 4 or 5 weeks, someone makes a payment. That's not a successful product, but there is something there. And one way of thinking about this is that Google has the technology and has the channel, but they don't have the product. Because the product in this case are the credit cards, the line of payment, the banking details. Apple, on the other hand, doesn't have a channel or technology, but they have the product. The iTunes store is the world's largest collection of valid credit cards. And that's got to be interesting to someone besides hackers. Someone's got to be wanting to do something with that. And that's where we think there's something interesting going on. There's something that's potentially about to happen in that space. And once that happens, any of you who have products that need to accept payment are potentially going to be very interested in this. And I checked earlier how many people in this room had iPhones, and a substantial number you did. And I'm sure that when you go to the pub or when you go to a restaurant and you sit down with your friends, you notice something similar. A lot of you have iPhones, or a lot of you have Samsung Galaxies of similar vintages, right? You notice this, that people tend to have either one of a few small number of smartphones. But the reality is that means nothing. If 5 of you are sitting around a table, all with pretty much exactly the same phone, there is nothing you can do. That proximity, that connection, that similarity of product just doesn't open up anything at all. And that just seems a bit weird. Like a really missed opportunity there, that something should be able to happen because of that. You should be able to do something with this. You should be able to play games with each other. You should be able to easily transfer contacts or things. But you just can't. Everything has to go back to the cloud. It has to go through Apple or Google servers, which I'm sure they love on some level, but it's not great for us. At the WWDC keynote a couple of weeks ago, Apple did announce AirDrop for iPhones. And it's convenient, but it's for sharing photos and contacts and things directly phone to phone. That seems like the beginning of something here. And there is actually the technology for this. There's a protocol called Wi-Fi Direct that's intended to facilitate this kind of communication. We're not yet doing anything with it. But again, something is potentially about to happen here, and that's potentially going to disrupt what happens with your products. Because now, that channel that you've opened up to everyone's iPhone, they can interconnect. Those two channels can talk to each other, and you can close a loop there. And finally, in a year's time, what product from this room is going to be up here? Who's going to really exploit something interesting about this shattered future? Who's going to find something that's happened here that could really tap some value and end up with their product on this screen? And in a moment, my colleague Chris Cheshire will be talking about how you go about testing that product out, how you iterate and build quickly and discover what that can really do to find out how to get your product on the screen. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris from Thoughtworks. I'm an experienced designer, and typically for the last year, I've been doing sort of rapid prototyping and development. And what I'd like to share with you are some techniques that you can use for validating ideas and rapidly designing for the mobile space. But before I start, I'd like to do a little experiment with you all. So you've all got a pad and pen. Everyone put it up in the air. Just prove to me you all have got it, and you've got it in your hands. Great. What I'd like you to do is to sketch for me a mobile app login screen. But I'm going to give you a constraint. You're not allowed to use a username or a password. You have to think maybe a third-party authentication or maybe utilizing the hardware within the device. Is that clear? Yeah? Looking good? All right, cool. I'll get back onto that a bit later. So, the old way, or the traditional way we used to do design. We'd have an idea. We'd get the business case for it. We'd get the budget for it. We'd get the team for it. What do we need to do? Where do we start? We need a design. So, typically, we would write a brief. Nice big brief with specification and features, and we'd throw that over to a designer or a design agency somewhere else, and they'd go off and they'd think about it, and this time goes by, and as a client, you're in the dark. You've got no communication with them. You don't know what's going on, and so you're just waiting there, and you might give them a call. How's it going? And they're like, it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet. I'm not going to show you. I'm not going to show you. And so you're still in the dark, and you're just thinking, what's going on? A few weeks has gone by, and all of a sudden, shazam, boom, there you go, here's your design, pixel perfect, end-to-end journey, all done. And you're like, oh, that's pretty cool, looks pretty slick, which is always the worst client when they say that, because you're like, something's coming. It's not quite right. And that's because you've had this massive quiet period of not communicating with each other. And so the ideas evolve in your mind as well as the designer. And so they've diverged, which is not great. What we want is the design and the vision to be in harmony. No divergence, constant communication between the team and the person whose idea it is you're building, designing at this point. So let's talk about mobile. The context has changed, and like Giles said, it's fragmented. We're no longer just using the desktop. We're out and about. We're using a mobile in a different way. We've got one eye and one thumb on the device. We're doing two things at once. You've probably walked into this person at some point because they're too busy checking something as well as walking around. We're playing games. We're looking at catalogs, walking down the street. There's a big case for applications in this area. And the market's grown massively over the last few years. Apple introduced the smartphone, really. They've opened up a marketplace for applications, charging developers. Android comes in, makes it open source for everyone, makes the market even bigger. You can see that although you've all got iPhones, Android is overtaken, right? And the Microsofts come into the game very late with an interesting interface. And they're actually having to pay developers to sort of catch up. So, there's a massive market there now. And they've brought us some interesting constraints. We've got to think about the screen size now. Like, what's important for that screen? Both from a business side, but from a user experience side as well, because we haven't got a great amount of space. And then we've got things like performance and battery life, which are all going to impact the way applications work. But they've given us some really cool things to think about as well. So we've got gestures, and we've got NFC, like Giles said, and GPS, and, of course, Siri. There's room for improvement on that, of course. And we're carrying these around in our pocket. They're with us all the time. And so we've got a massive amount of opportunity with this growth to really produce something awesome. And those constraints are actually giving us focus, because we're really thinking about what we actually want on that screen and how we're going to use it. And these kind of capabilities are allowing us to come up with some really funky applications. And so we can't stay in the dark anymore. For us to sort of take lead and be the market leaders, we need to be able to respond at a rapid pace and not wait weeks for things to happen. So we need a new way. What does that look like? Well, is everyone familiar with Build, Measure, Learn? Hands up, who's seen this before? So a lot of you. This is kind of part of our ethos. Every project utilizes this philosophy of building and measuring and learning. The idea around it is to build the smallest, or design or create something in its smallest form to validate whether that idea is going to work or not. But hands up when they see the word build. They think code. I'm going to put my hand up. Yeah, good. I like you people. Okay. What if I said build was a sketch? Does that freak you out? There's a couple of faces which are smiling. That's good. So let's go back to the 30-second experiment. I want you to think about these questions. These are a very small fraction of the sort of questions that we'd be doing on guerrilla testing. We'd be going out and actually validating things. They're non-leading questions. I don't want you to tell the person next to you what it is. We know it's a login screen, so we've kind of cheated there already. But what does it do? How do I use it? And more importantly, do they get it? And would they change it? You've got 30 seconds to very quickly validate your design. All right, time's up. It wasn't a test. It's cool if you've not got there. But what have you done? Well, you've designed something in a very small fashion to test whether it's valid or not. So you've done a build, you've measured, and hopefully some of you have managed to learn whether your idea was good or not. Okay, so it's rapid response. We've got that rapid feedback now. You've drawn a sketch in 30 seconds, and hopefully some of you have managed to validate in 30 seconds whether it actually worked. This is the kind of pace that we need for mobile. So how do we kick off a project now? Well, typically, we would have a sketch session. And we would actually, as a team, and this is an important thing to realize, is that a sketch isn't just the designer's responsibility. It's a team effort to make sure that everyone understands the concept and the idea. So as a team, we sit down, and for 10 minutes or so, we'll sketch how we envisage that mobile app will work. And then after said time, we'll review that journey. We'll talk everyone through it. Sometimes we'll do a bit of this, and it's been, in the past, a great opportunity for our product owners to sort of say, I like this feature, do more of this. I don't like this feature, do less of that. So it gives us sort of a focus for the application. And so we'll do another round. So like you've been doing, like you could have done another version of your drawing. We would do another sketch. But this time we'll be utilizing everyone's ideas together. We might pair this time. And we'll repeat this through, say, an hour or so, just to get a good idea of what that concept will look like. And sometimes we'll get a bit of subjective comments, and someone will not want it to work a particular way. And rather than spend half an hour getting really angry about it, we'll just try and do both. So we won't bin it. Boom, there's my transition. We'll do an A/B test. But we're not doing an A/B test with code, with having to hook it up to Google Analytics. We're just doing it visually. We'll just give the user both versions. Simple as that. So there's our build. Now our vision and our design are in harmony. We're actually going at the same pace. Everyone's on the same page. We're all collaborating together. We haven't got a silo anymore like with the designer. We're actually all communicating together. So now we need to test. Has anyone used a user lab before? A couple of hands. So a user lab, pretty cool, very expensive. You have a one-way mirror. The team can observe, and you would test the person. There'd be a transcriber and video, and it's all great. But it's for mobile. It doesn't feel right. You're not catching the user in their daily routine. It's very man-made. It's not very organic. And typically, you have to pay the participants to come into your lab, which again, it's an added expense, and it takes time to organize. Coffee shop. I think we've got a few in London. You can just turn up, just talk to people. A good friend of mine told me, just tell them you're an entrepreneur, and they'll want to do it for free. You could pay for a coffee if you can't convince them with the entrepreneur trick. But you've got access to loads of people. You've got them in their natural habitat. They're normally very willing to get involved. And so you can start to talk them through your application. But well, actually, I say you should. You should actually not talk to them. You should let them talk to you. And you'll find that they'll just give you masses of quality information about the direction of your application. You'll quickly realize whether your idea works or not. You'll be validating it right there. And so you'll ask questions like you've done, non-leading questions like, what do you think this is? How do you think that would work? Tell me what you see. Normally, people will just feed you information. You've even got to prompt them. But if they're stuck, you'll get that. You'll understand. You'll be feeling their empathy. It's really an opportunity to get as close as you can to your users, which the designer sitting in some silo away by himself, herself, is just never going to get. And at this point, we've not written a single line of code. So you could have done some sketches in the morning, tested in the afternoon, or at lunchtime, and you've come back and you've got actual feedback right there, whether it works or not. Once you've done that, though, it's very important, if you haven't got your whole team there, to share that vision. You've all started off together. You've got to carry on together, so they're in harmony. I would say early on, it doesn't have to be just a designer doing this kind of testing. You're only asking, is that what you expected? How do you think this works? You could actually split off and have a couple of teams doing this at the same time to make sure you're all on the same page. So developers can ask that question as well. It's not just the designer's responsibility. And so we've dramatically tightened that loop. We're down to hours, minutes sometimes. So we're really working fast. And then after a while, you're going to find that your application, because it's on paper, is not starting to feel like a real app, and you're going to question, where are we going with it? And so there's an application called Pop, and this is pretty cool. It allows you to take photos of said prototype on paper, and then wire it up with hotspots, and give you some simple transitions to the next slides. So people can start to get some more of a tactile feel of what your application works like. And then from there, you might even get an idea of the sort of the gestures they're looking for, because pinching on a piece of paper isn't really that great. And we're still not writing any code. So At some point, we're going to have to start writing code. But picturing this in a day, the first day, we've actually validated whether our idea actually works. And we've got a good idea of what we want to start designing. And the developers, because they've been kept in the loop, have got a good idea of what they need to start thinking about building and the technologies and things they might need. So in terms of takeaways that I'd like to think about, meet your users, empathize with them, understand them, make sure you're listening to what they're saying, because you're designing an app with them, not for them. And that's a really important thing I'd like to think about. Seek that rapid validation. You've just done a login screen. It's not the whole app, but you've got an idea now. Some of you may have used voice recognition. Some of you may have used the camera to recognize the face. That's all you need to know. Well, are people willing to sign in with Facebook is a big question that you might need answering before you start the rest of the process. Get out the building. Meet your users. Don't stay in the office all the time. It's very important. I can't stress that enough. And everyone should get involved with the drawings. It's not just the designer's responsibility. Make sure you all get involved. And it's fun as well. The power of the paper. Feel it. It's pretty cool. And it allows you to work very fast. It's cheap. And yeah, it's really fun for everyone. Here are some of the tools you might want to use. I used them for this. Thanks, people.
Hello again. So we want to talk a bit about some of the tools beyond Sharpies and Post-it notes, which are incredibly valuable, but then eventually we need to start writing some code, and there are some things that we think can help you with that. And we're going to frame this conversation in terms of the Thoughtworks technology radar. Who here is familiar with the tech radar? Good, a lot of people. But so for the people who are new to this lovely picture, we have a group within Thoughtworks called the Technology Advisory Board. They are a collection of these sort of senior technologists and architects and thinkers in Thoughtworks. They support our CTO, Rebecca Parsons. And three times a year, they put together a document we call the Tech Radar. We've just released a new one about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's currently on our website. And the intent of this is to look across the world of technology and to see which pieces are of interest and where we think there's movement. And we break this up into this radar into 4 quadrants. We have an area where we talk about techniques, that are techniques around software development, software building. We have some tools that we think you can use. We have platforms, and finally we have languages. And then within each of these quadrants, and overall, we break it up into 4 rings, working from the outside in. The first ring is called hold. Now, things in this ring are pieces of technology that we're just not sure about. We think, for whatever reason, that you should be a bit cautious with. You should start to think about, is this something we really want to be using? Some new technology appears in here sometimes, things that people are getting a bit excited about, and then we look at it and go, you know what? Not sure. Also, some old things that have been around for a while and really are past the use by date. They'll often be a hold. After that, we have the assess ring. The point of this ring is new things that we like the look of, and we think there's potentially a lot of value you could extract from it, so it's worth thinking about how could we perhaps be helped by this. Then there's a ring we call trial. In here, it's things that we think are showing enough promise, showing enough value that you really want to think about how can we use these, actually starting to use them on projects. Maybe a low-risk project, maybe a project that could particularly benefit from it that is higher risk, something like that. And finally, in the center, we have the ring or the circle called adopt. Now, the most succinct way of describing what that means is that things in that part of the radar, we'd laugh at you at the pub if you weren't using. It's that level. So, a couple of other notes about this. You'll see there's a lot of things on here, but there aren't thousands. The world of technology is huge. This is stuff that we think is currently interesting for some reason. So things will often things migrate into adopt, and we didn't take them off the radar because they're just obvious and everyone's using them. The idea of adopting these is no longer controversial. all the things that are in hold that aren't on there. Adabas natural, that's long since gone. And finally, the most important point is it's just their opinions. So it's the opinions of the tab of Thoughtworks, who are our senior technologists. So their opinions carry some weight, a good bit of weight. But it is their opinion, their view. And tonight, Jill and I will be talking through some of the items on here across these different quadrants and rings that we think are of particular interest in the world of mobile application development and mobile software. Again, though, this is our opinion on where things are interesting and what's of note. And finally, we would like to hear your opinions as well. We've found this has often been quite a controversial document, and there's some really interesting discussions that can happen as a result of that. And over to Jill to introduce herself to you.
Thanks, Giles. Yes, I've been at Thoughtworks for about 2.5 years now, and I'm part of the experience design practice. I've been described as slightly more of a geek than a designer, which is quite interesting at Thoughtworks, because I started my career in software engineering, and then I studied product design, industrial design. So I got really interested in the web a long time ago, and I made my first web page, we were saying the other day, in 1994, believe it or not. It seems like, well, it was decades ago, wasn't it now? So, and I used Netscape 1.1 to test it in on my first web page, which was Internet Explorer hadn't been invented then even. So, and how things have moved on. So it's so exciting to see all this new technology with mobile. And we're going to talk about some of the exciting things to do with the more front-end side of web development. Firstly,
we want to start with this technology called HTML5 storage. And this is an interesting one. It's gone through a number of different iterations and evolutions here. That it's the collection of technologies emerging as part of HTML5 that allow you to store more structured data and more data in the browser without having to send everything back to the server. It's, there's been a few different pieces of technology, but it's settling down on one called local storage and one called session storage, which are roughly analogous to session cookies and persistent cookies. It's a way of just attaching a piece of data to a key, some string, some name, sticking that in the browser, and having it be there later on without having to get it back from the server. So you can use them. You can think of them as equivalent to cookies, except they don't go back to the server. And that's where things start to get interesting, because thanks to the EU cookie directive, you're now probably familiar with that message that appears on every single website you go to now. And this is because of it doesn't go back to the server. It's not potentially at risk in the same way with regards to your privacy, so that this doesn't apply. So you can start to think about using local storage and session storage as a way of replacing cookies. So we think that's really quite interesting. It's also got some interest in the world of mobile too, because you can actually put a lot more data in there because it's not going back and forth to the server all the time. You can start to store a lot of information about the user and about their interaction with your application to make their experience richer without necessarily being really creepy about it. And you can start to do some sort of a bit more interesting things, like in the world of mobile, we're seeing a lot of single-page JavaScript applications, really complex JavaScript applications that don't involve movements between pages. Historically, it's been a bit difficult to manage where the user is at in these kinds of apps. And HTML5 storage can be a nice way to manage that information. So we think that's strongly worth trialing as potentially a replacement for cookies.
So, responsive design. I'm sure absolutely everybody in the room this evening has heard about responsive design and has paid a great deal of interest to it. So, this is a project that we did at Thoughtworks very recently that I was involved with. It's called Time for Change. And we started the project in January and it ran for 9 weeks. It was a fixed deadline. And the reason for that was there was a concert with Beyonce, which some of you may have seen on BBC on the 1st of June. So they needed a website to communicate what this new movement was about. In time for the concert. Obviously, being a concert, they wanted to get people involved with things and they wanted people on their mobile phones actually at the event to be able to interact with this. Because the key thing about it is that it's a women's movement and it's to do with empowering women and girls and making donations to projects which do that. So the idea was that you could do this on your mobile phone. So we had a great time making this project, building the website, and learnt an enormous amount about exactly how easy or difficult it is to do responsive design. So on this slide here, Mashable, who you all probably are familiar with, Mashable magazine, described 2013 as the year of responsive web design. But it's actually not on the Thoughtworks radar as adopt at the moment. So why not? Why would we say that something as almost universal as responsive web design shouldn't be adopt? Well, partly from the Chime for Change project, we learned that there are quite a few difficulties in implementing a really great user experience in responsive web design. The first one being the huge development time for front-end work. We would say this is probably, we were thinking a little bit extra, maybe 50% more front-end development time. Turns out it was at least double or triple the amount of effort that needed to go in to make a really rich web user experience. I think in most cases we'd be looking at 2 or 3 times the effort to produce something like that. The type of application that you're building is really important as well. Obviously, Mashable are a publishing platform, which is great for them because most of their content is text with a few pictures. But if you're trying to build something that describes a concert, describes lots of really fascinating projects, and there's a lot of content that's quite rich, then that's quite difficult, actually. And we've got several other projects at Thoughtworks at the moment where there are lots of interactions with forms and that kind of thing, capturing user data. And what we're finding is that it's really different, the experience on a tablet and the experience on a mobile phone, and the sizes of things you need to press on and click on and touch on are extremely different. So certain applications work really, really well for it, and honestly, certain applications, and quite a lot of those that we build at Thoughtworks, don't really. We also found on the project that there was almost no automated testing available for this in terms of the interface part of it. So we had a lot of manual testing. So the QA time is enormous as well as the front-end development time, which might rule it out for many projects. The last thing, really, is the lack of tooling for front-end developers actually working on this kind of thing. It's still really in its early stages now, and it's very, very difficult to simulate devices without actually having a huge range of devices in front of every developer as they're working on this kind of project.
Moving along into the platforms quadrant, there's a couple of things we want to talk about here that are, we think, of interest. The first one is a mobile application development framework called Characterise. And a colleague in the front row was laughing at me because I happen to be one of the maintainers of this project, so that may have something to do with it appearing on this presentation. But this is, I think it's interesting. I think you should think it's interesting too, because it's a slightly different approach to mobile application development, particularly cross-platform. It doesn't try to pretend that you're writing for something other than an iPhone or something other than an Android device. But it does let you share the code that may, say, drive complex banking interactions, where you've got to check that this amount is not greater than your daily transfer limits, and you've filled in all the fields, and you've go through the process of confirming and verifying and submitting. That sort of stuff that really has nothing to do with the UI, that is complex and is part of the definition of, say, a retail banking product. That code you really would like to share, but you don't want to have to give up a high-quality, high-touch user interface to achieve that. That's where Characterise provides some support. What we think is most interesting is that Characterise really forces some patterns into your application development, some ways of dealing with this to achieve a nicely testable application that will move across platforms smoothly and be able to have a rich UI everywhere. So there's other technologies such as PhoneGap and Xamarin that do similar things, but they don't have the patterns. So I think there's a nice bit of a combination here where you could look at Characterise, which is why we've got it in assess, not in trial and not in adopt. And you could take some of those patterns and some of those ideas and you could use them in frameworks like you're building, or applications that you're building with frameworks like Xamarin or PhoneGap and things like that.
So next we have SMS and USSD as a UI, and I think I better start this by explaining exactly what USSD actually is, because until a few months ago I didn't know myself either actually. It's a technology which is very similar to SMS. It's 182 character messages versus 140 for an SMS, but the key difference is it enables two-way connections with a server, so messages go in both directions, and this is a really, really powerful technology. The key use for it is on feature phones rather than smartphones. So again, you might think, why on earth would Thoughtworks be recommending to adopt something which is to do with feature phones when everyone's talking about smartphones these days? Well, actually, the market for feature phones is still enormous. And in the first quarter of 2013, over 1 million feature phones were sold, and that isn't a small percentage of the market at all. That's actually 48.8% of the market still, so it's still really, really significant. The key thing about that is that feature phones are actually very prevalent in certain parts of the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America, and there's a good reason why they're not going to stop being widely used in those places anytime soon, in that they're very, very cost-effective to buy. They're quite robust, and also they don't need huge battery recharging. The battery life is extremely long, so it's absolutely fantastic in parts of the world, like Kenya particularly, which I'm going to talk about in a second, where there isn't the same access to electricity to recharge your phone that we just take for granted in the UK. So the slide here is a product called M-Pesa, which some of you may be familiar with. And Kenya, in some ways, is advanced over the UK in that this allows mobile payments from a phone SIM card. And it's not just a small product either. Roughly, I think Giles was saying it's half the GDP of Kenya actually goes through this payment system. So it's an absolutely huge amount of money, and it allows people who have no access to banking in any other form, which seems quite amazing to us in the UK today, but no access to banking in any other format. It gives them an ability to send and make payments, receive payments securely. So absolutely fantastic from that point of view. So a couple of things you might not know about why USSD applications are being developed when things like that are obviously already in existence. One of the projects here you can see in the background is for a charity called CamFed, which Thoughtworks has recently released. And this is amazing in that it allows an organisation that provides educational services in Africa to collect data from their students on performance and also the cost of the educational programs as well. And they were really growing hugely and got to the point where they couldn't any longer manage that as a paper-based system. So for a very, very low cost, Thoughtworks has managed to develop a system via USSD, which enables educational organisations within Africa to upload once a day, to upload their data onto a central server. And it's been a brilliant tool for that organisation to manage. Down the bottom there are a couple of more frivolous applications, but still hugely popular in certain parts of the world. On the left there, it's Twitter via USSD. So obviously Twitter is very text-based anyway. Perhaps more surprisingly, on the bottom right is Facebook, which is growing enormously in Africa. That's one of their key target areas. But Facebook is available via USSD messaging. And sadly, I haven't got a photo I can actually show you of that because we can't access it in the UK, obviously. But that's a brilliant technology as well that's enabling lots of people to connect socially and do sorts of things that we take for granted today.
So moving on to the tools quadrant, jump ahead there. There's this technology called browser-based templating. And the tab has decided to place that in assess. And when it comes to mobile, this is one I'm going to disagree with. I think it should be absolutely in trial, probably in adopt. So browser-based templating is this idea that instead of doing all of your HTML generation on your web server and then sending the generated HTML to your client and having it displayed there, you instead send down a template embedded in the HTML. So a big chunk of the HTML is displayed and just drawn directly by the browser running on the phone. But as well inside there is some HTML that's hidden away that's a template. And it would use similar templating markup that you're used to using on the server side. And then you'd use a JavaScript library running in the browser on the phone to turn that template into something to display. This is an essential technique if you're building a single-page JavaScript application. A single-page JavaScript applications are really interesting in mobile because you want to be really responsive because you're displaying a lot more screens and people are expecting a lot more of an immersive reaction. So you want to be able to move between parts of the application really quickly. And doing that without a round trip to the server is much faster, especially on, say, mobile phone networks where latency is a real problem. Bandwidth may be great, but latency can be a major issue. So using this, you can now get just a chunk of data from the server, pass that through a template in your device, and display something new. And if you get a new chunk of data, you can do the same thing again. You're sending less data because you're not sending display data. You're also working more at a service level with your backend rather than at a UI level. And you're really adopting this idea of JSON-based web services to drive your application. Technology-wise, there's Moustache.js, which is quite a nice templating language for this sort of thing. And there is another library that glues this all together and makes it a bit easier that I'm going to mention just because I simply love its name. It's called IconHas.js. Just, it's quite nice, quite useful, but it's just got such a great name. So I think those things really for mobile web application development should be very seriously considered. And then moving on to the languages and frameworks section. So there's quite a few things here because this gets quite interesting in the world of mobile that we want to. I want to start off by talking about JavaScript as a platform, and MV star frameworks. We've had for a long time on the radar JavaScript as a first-class language, and I believe it moved into adopt previously, and I think it's now dropped off the radar. Is that a colleague from the tab in the back there who's saying yes? Now that's obvious, right? That's going to happen because we know about that. We know to treat JavaScript as a first-class language. We know to treat the code we write in JavaScript like any other code because it's driving a lot of our applications now. There's a lot of logic there. We need to really think about that. We need to test that. But something else has happened now with JavaScript as a platform. You can now view it not just as a language that you use to do client-side validation of phone numbers. You can start to view it as a way of driving your whole application forward. And there's one thing in particular I think that's really opened this up. It's AMDs, asynchronous module definitions, and require.js. With that, you've now got the kind of basic tool that's necessary to really structure some quite highly complex applications that are tens of thousands of lines long now. And you can build on that to do some really interesting things. Now, we've also got this MV star frameworks that we've put in trial. This is, again, I'm a bit less certain about these, to be honest. I think JavaScript is a powerful language. It's really it can be quite a nice language. And you can write some complex applications without a lot of heavyweight frameworks. In fact, what I think is really interesting is to start using lots of small libraries and gluing them together to produce interesting frameworks of your own. I think there's a real thing about rolling your own framework as a way of driving up a JavaScript application development. There are a couple of other frameworks, such as AngularJS and Knockout, that I think are a bit different because they do some really interesting stuff with data binding that I think makes them quite interesting in that space. So driving your application's UI through data binding through Angular or Knockout, I think is a really powerful technique. But using an MVC JavaScript framework just because you think you need to, if you can't point at a specific reason why it's going to add value, then you don't need a framework to create a controller in JavaScript. It's just a function. You don't need a framework to create a model in JavaScript. It's just a function. So just do that. Just use that. Along those lines, we've had one of the most controversial decisions, I think, in recent radar history, which was to place Backbone.js in hold. And it remains in hold, and I think it's unsurprising because they were one of the first serious frameworks to explore what you can do with JavaScript and how you should structure your code. And it appears now that they made a number of mistakes, and that's really to be expected because they were first. They were exploring the way, finding out what worked and what didn't. And we have seen enough problems with working with Backbone that we're sort of suggesting you think twice about that one.
So Sass Sandwich. Sandwich isn't actually a CSS framework. We're talking about CSS frameworks now. This is my recent experiences over the last few months on Thoughtworks projects, as I've been involved with 3 different ones, which, as you can see at the bottom there, a traditional handwritten CSS project, followed by a Sass project, followed by another which was traditional handwritten CSS. And so that's given me a great opportunity just to have a look at Sass in particular and see how that performs compared with how traditional CSS was used for development, and look at things. Particularly we noticed was speed, the key takeaway from that. Sass is really quick to develop in. So thinking about CSS frameworks, there's quite a lot on the market at the moment. As you can see there, we've got a few there. I'm sure most of you are familiar with either Sass or Less, possibly been using them on projects, but I'm sure you've heard of them. And we're finding at the moment that Sass is really taking over from traditional CSS on most things that we do at Thoughtworks. Less, not so much. I haven't been able to find a single Thoughtworks project in the UK that's using it. I haven't really searched exhaustively, but it looks like that there aren't many going on at the moment. So we're thinking that Sass is probably going to become a bit of a standard. And it's allowed us really to gain a massive amount of speed by using compiled CSS to create what we would otherwise have had to spend quite a long time writing. So our experience on the project showed that Sass initially takes about an hour to get used to doing a bit of development and understand the difference between SAS and CSS and how it compares and that kind of thing, some of the variables and features of it. About a day later, most of the developers felt actually very comfortable with it and were completely fine doing all the development like that. And then a week later, we decided that SAS really had helped speed up performance. So it was a massive, massive gain straight away on a project. And that was actually the Time for Change project that was the one in the middle, where we only had 9 weeks to develop the whole website. So it was absolutely crucial that we made the right choices and got those working really, really quickly. So some of the benefits of projects like SAS and LESS really are using variables in the code and increased code readability, and basically just general maintenance is quite useful. It is backwards compatible in that you can just install SAS. You don't have to get rid of all your previous CSS. You can start at a certain point and move forwards with it. So it doesn't mean kind of redoing your whole website at that point. Some of the other things that we're useful for as Compass is a Rails framework, and that gives a lot more flexibility in the type of mixins and variables that you can use doing these developments. And that was very, very useful for us doing responsive design. So I think we'll start to see more of that kind of thing. And it's not available for other platforms, similar products at the moment, but I'm sure we'll start to see that coming up in the future. And we've got Susie there, which is a framework that Giles is very fond of, which is... He's not going to say why.
Yeah, no. My wife's name is Susie, and we were using Susie on a recent project, and that was just a bit... hearing developers talk about Susie, the CSS framework, and yeah, distracting.
So I haven't personally used it myself, but I know that that gives you a massive advantage developing responsive layout. So that's something that may have actually helped us on the previous project we were working on if we'd tried it. So definitely all these things are adopt. There's no way that anyone would want to go back to writing handwritten CSS after they've used some of these compiled products. And all of those are a winner. The one that we weren't so positive about was Bootstrap, and this has gone off the radar into hold. And some of you might know about Twitter Bootstrap. It's been quite widely talked about and quite widely used on projects, including at Thoughtworks. And what we started finding was I chose that as a solution for one of the projects we were working on. And about a week later, I kind of wished I hadn't really, because it gives you quite a lot of speed improvements and flexibility to begin with, and you can build great responsive layouts and have everything looking quite nice quite quickly. But actually, because we make custom software at Thoughtworks, we don't usually need to use the kind of things that Twitter Bootstrap offers. And really, the flexibility then starts to become a problem, and there's a lot of excess code there that we really took no advantage of whatsoever. So from lots of points of view, I would say that Twitter Bootstrap is probably not going to be used widely on many Thoughtworks projects in the future, especially with these frameworks like Compass just becoming more widely available. So I think that's well deserved to be in hold.
And so we just want to thank you for your time and wrap up today what we've talked about. We see mobile as a really interesting space, but we see it as something that's driven change across the industry and the way we think about the systems, the applications we build. We think about them as looking for opportunities now where you can start to do something dramatically different, because the way people interact with computing is changing. It's going through this sort of seismic shift, or some other corny catchphrase, to illustrate really how people are seeing different models of interaction. And somewhere in there are really exciting and new channels. Somewhere in there is a bunch of segues for your face. And it's working out how you can develop your product in the right way to exploit the opportunities that are successful. But once you're talking about how to develop your products, you need to think about how do you move quickly? How do you verify that? How do you make sure that the idea you think you might have is the idea that you should actually build? And as Chris talked about, there are some great techniques and some great tools you can use now to get that happening really quickly, half a day, without writing code, by getting things in front of your potential customers and saying, oh, what about this? What do you think? But ultimately, you do need to build something. And the explosion of tools that you can use to do that is exciting. And it's big, and it's going to continue to change. And that, as technologists, that excites us as well. And we like to talk and think about that sort of stuff. So we just want to take a moment to thank you for coming along. Thank you for listening to us. And if you've got any questions now, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll be around for another hour or so to have a chat about some of this stuff. Thank you.